Ashlee Chesny, and there's nothing that I love more than a great story. But there's one storyteller in particular that I love as much as a good story because her life was riveting, compelling, and equal to the great works that she created. So on July 7th, join me to hear Zora Neale Hurston, the story of the storyteller. I'll be sharing all of the information I have on her life, the fun details, the unexpected details, and a lot of connections that you won't believe she had. The legacy of Zora Neale Hurston is timeless, so much so that it's controversial, often conflicts, and it's always something new emerging about her. I'm so excited to share this with the Midland Center for the Arts, Make Art Virtual. See you July 7th.
Hey everybody, my name is Matt Travis, and I am Director of Choral and Orchestral Programs at Midland Center for the Arts. And welcome to today's Make Art Virtual Conversation. Today we are delighted to be with the amazing speaker, and I really do mean amazing, Mrs. Ashlee Chesny. Ashlee manages to make her wealth of knowledge engaging and exciting. She has been a keynote speaker, regular radio show guest, and annual presenter and guest lecturer at Michigan State University. Her work has been featured in national magazines, and she has dedicated her life to creating and telling vivid stories for both children and women of color. She even uses the stories she creates to develop programming that makes learning fun and meaningful for children. Having served over 5,000 students from Detroit all the way to Ghana, Ashlee hopes to inspire children to hold on to their dreams as they find them and believe in themselves. Forever a kid at heart, Ashlee finds encouragement to continue working in her craft from the literary great Zora Neale Hurston. When she is not creating stories or telling her own, the speaker presents Zora Neale Hurston in an innovative way that is lively and riveting. Today, we are excited to enjoy the presentation of Zora Neale Hurston, the story of the storyteller. Please stick around at the end as Ashlee will be taking questions in about 45 minutes for the last 15 minutes of her presentation. And be sure to check out her wonderful children's books. My daughter B loves Nico. Be sure to check it out. It's really awesome stories. And I'm so honored to introduce you all to my good friend, Mrs. Ashlee Chesny.
I am super excited to be here. I actually wrote myself a note reminding myself to introduce myself. I have a bad habit, which is also a pretty good habit, of thinking that I'm already friends with everybody. And I hope by the presentation, by the time it's over, we'll be friends. But with that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Ashlee Chesny, and I am a published children's author and a published author for women also. I actually did not expect several things that happened in my life. The first was to become a published children's author or to use my books to create programming for children of color that makes learning exciting and meaningful for them. Now, when I was a little girl, I didn't really love school. So I understand when children have challenges, and my goal is to help them overcome them. So I removed those barriers by making it fun and engaging with a literacy foundation. Now, aside from that, I write for women. I've had several of my articles published in Harness Magazine, and one of them was on Zora Neale Hurston and why everyone should know about Zora Neale Hurston and, more importantly, her life, not just her work. Now, if anybody knows about Zora Neale Hurston, while I'm still introducing myself, drop it in the comments below. How do you know Zora? Have you ever heard of Zora Neale Hurston? Have you ever read a book by Zora Neale Hurston or any fun facts? I am an avid student of Zora's life. I find so much inspiration in what she does. In fact, when I published my first book for women called Oh Shit, I'm 30, 100 real wise and hilarious things every woman should know to own 30 like a boss. I did not think. I was like, I'm a children's author known as Mrs. Ashlee, pretty much a children's personality. And I could not see myself writing for women. But when I discovered Zora, I started to develop the courage to do all the things because that's who Zora was. She did all the things. She lived a life, and I'm hoping that you'll enjoy the details of her life that I will share with you today. So, Matt, do we have anybody, including yourself, that knows anything about Zora, by Zora, or I think just about or by Zora?
Putting me on the spot. So, full disclosure, when we get comments on here, there'll be probably a several second lag. But I remember reading a lot of her stuff, specifically Their Eyes Were Watching God,
Yes.
in high school. Yeah.
Absolutely. And me too. So I am a storyteller. I love to tell stories. I talked about not liking school when I was a child. I actually did not like to read, but I always loved to tell stories. In fact, my grandfather would pick me up after school and he would ask me what happened in class today. And I would make up the most crazy, they would just be crazy stories. I would say, oh, a dragon flew around the room and we were supposed to take a test, but I didn't study, so it was my dragon. And it blew fire on my teacher's hair, and nobody had to take the test. It would be crazy things like that. And so when I got to high school in 10th grade, just like Matt, I had to read Their Eyes Were Watching God. Now, unfortunately, I didn't read it, guys. I actually did not read the book. I was lucky to have an older sister who was an avid reader, and she was essentially my Spark Notes back then. And she told me everything that happened. But one thing I remembered was that she said the character's name was Tea Cake. And all of the other things that I had to read for school that maybe my sister didn't read, I had never heard a nickname used by an author in a story. And of course, I'm thinking about my family and we have nicknames, but in a book, no way. So it wouldn't be until college that I actually read Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I was blown away. I didn't know exactly what it was about Their Eyes Were Watching God that was so special to me, but it seemed so interesting because I had never experienced writing like that. A lot of times in Black literature, you can tell that there are certain themes that the author hopes to accomplish in their writing. But for Zora, I would later discover, she just wanted to write about characters who happen to be Black. The Blackness was not a central theme to her. She looked at them as people. Now, continuing my lack of love of reading and love of storytelling, I was invited, and pretty lucky to be invited, to Michigan State University's Residential College of Arts and Humanities Black History Series in 2018. And they said, oh, we're your partner for your nonprofit. We see how you interact with the kids. We think you would be a great presenter. And I have been giving presentations at that point, but not on Zora Neale Hurston. And so I was asked the question that changed my life. Who inspired you to become a writer? What literary greats inspired you to become a writer? And guys, I'm going to tell you the truth. It was like college days all over again. I had to essentially cram for this presentation because I was thinking, well, who did inspire me to become a writer? And so I remember two people, of course, Zora, with Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I thought of Langston Hughes because I did love poetry. And it was pretty easy to read his poetry because he used everyday language, which I loved. So, my first year at Michigan State, I decided to do my presentation on Zora and Langston. Really, Langston first because I knew more about him. So, along the way, researching for my presentation because I still wanted to prepare, I discovered that Zora and Langston were actually best friends during the Harlem Renaissance. And if there's any time period in history that I have been interested in, it's the Harlem Renaissance. I could imagine myself going to the speakeasies, maybe going to some of those fancy dinners, maybe even being an author during that time. And so I started to prepare for that presentation, and I got about halfway through, and I was like, this Zora lady is pretty cool. How come we don't know more about her? But I went ahead and did the presentation that year. But by the time that presentation ended, I was interested in Zora solely. Now, something else happened that year. That year, we got lucky and we won a trip, a family vacation to Orlando and Daytona, Florida. Now, we were not expecting to do this, but down we headed in June, so almost 3 years ago. And Orlando is actually close to the city or the town that's the setting in Their Eyes Were Watching God. Now, let me tell you, I didn't know for a long time that Eatonville, Florida was a real place. I thought it was just a fictitious place that Zora made up. But here we were, a minute's drive, a few minutes drive away from Eatonville, Florida. And this, Zora always says she was born in Eatonville, Florida, but she was not. Her family moved there when she was pretty young, around 3 or 4. But she calls it her hometown. She always did. And so I was like, well, I have to go. Now I'm presenting on Zora. I have to go to her hometown. Something about that seemed so special to me because it wasn't a hometown of Detroit, where I'm from, or Orlando, or Bay City, or Midland. It was Eatonville. And I am a Michigander. So even being in Florida, it was a change for me. So we went to Eatonville. And the trip, I promised you, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I could feel the spirit of Zora there, and I got so excited. We visited a small museum, and then across the street, there was a library. We went into the library because there was a pavilion being built and named for Zora. Now we got there, and I'm thinking like, oh, this is the hometown of Zora Neale Hurston. Her name is on everything here, at least in that area. And so we walk into the library, and I asked one of the employees there, I said, hey, what can you tell me about Zora Neale Hurston? And the response was, are you ready for this? Who? And I was blown away. I thought, no way, this is her hometown, and they don't know about her. And from that moment on, I took the pledge to bring Zora to everyone, not just writers, not just aspiring authors, but to everyone. So today, I'm hoping to bring her to you. If you know Zora, I'm hoping that you'll find some more things that you love about her or did know about her. And if you don't know Zora, I'm hoping that you will leave this presentation feeling as though you have met her. I want to start today's presentation with a quote. And back behind me, you see my collection of books about Zora or by Zora. This book in my hand, though, is very special because it's the first biography about Zora by Robert Hemingway, and it was written in the 70s. And Alice Walker, who was responsible for finding Zora's grave and really bringing her to modern day society, she actually wrote the introduction for this. And she has a quote that really called me to action. The quote says, "We are a people. A people do not throw their geniuses away. If they do, it is our duty as witnesses for the future to collect them again for the sake of our children. If necessary, bone by bone." And that was written in December 1976. And I wasn't quite around then. But still, those words called me to action. Zora was and still is a genius. Her accomplishments are far beyond her written works. The life that she lived was revolutionary within itself. And so, one of the things I think set Zora apart, especially for the time that she lived in, was the fact that she was not someone who grew up in the South poor or destitute. She even grew up in a town that was supposedly the first all black municipality in the United States. Now, okay, she grew up there in this small town of Eatonville. She didn't just grow up there. Her father was one of the lawmakers there and even served as mayor twice. This informed the way that Zora saw a lot of things when it came to the world. She was never shy. She never felt as though there was a quote unquote race problem, which was something she articulated a lot in her life. She thought that if you worked hard, if you gave it your best, that you could achieve anything. And with the confidence of growing up in this tight knit community where she was not just a citizen, but the mayor's kid, I think that Zora, some of her thoughts and some of the things she articulated directly contradicted her peers, even her best friends. So Zora was born in Alabama, and that's where her parents and her siblings were born. She was born like right snap dab in the middle of this big family. And Zora is interesting because when it came to being a girl back then, of course you were expected to wear skirts and certain things weren't proper. And Zora was just the opposite. She was born the little firecracker right from the beginning. She would fight with boys. She would go off. Her imagination was vivid as could be as a child. She would stay under her house and play with little dolls that she made out of things around her house, doorknobs and old pieces of soap. She would imagine storylines for these dolls that she made, and she would give them silly names. And names really based off of what they were. So Mrs. Horn Husk would marry Mr. Soap or something like that. Zora was an adventurer from the time she could walk. She would sit on the gatepost outside of her house and she would watch travelers go by. And she had what her mother called wonder dust sprinkled on her feet. She knew that she wanted to go on adventures and to see the world. In fact, she would sometimes ask to hitch a ride with strangers to see where they were going. Now, this was something, she was born in 1891. So you think at 10, this is 1901. This is not something that a little black girl, any girl, but especially a little black girl should be doing. And this was much to the dismay of her grandmother and her father, who encouraged her mother to beat her because they literally feared for her life. Zora was rambunctious. She was a tomboy. She was outspoken. And Zora's character, if you want to know who Zora was as a child, you can actually read her short story, Drenched in Light. And there's a character there who she should have just named Zora. But she named the character Isis Watts. And Isis Watts, she was Zora. And her grandmother beat her every day, tried to squash her spirit, but Isis did not let her spirit be squashed. Instead, the story ends, spoiler alert, with Isis getting to travel with a white couple. And they actually paid her grandmother and said, "Oh, just let her go with us. She's drenched in light." And so that shows how Zora thought of herself. She wasn't worried that her grandmother or father did not think she was special. She knew that she was special and she was drenched in light. But Zora's life of light was really made possible by her mom, which I think Lucy Potts Hurston had to be the coolest mom, because back then she didn't tell her daughter. She had two daughters. So she had Zora and Sarah was a year older than Zora. Sarah was everything that her dad wanted her to be. Zora was the opposite. And so she usually got into lots of trouble with her dad. Now, when it came to Zora and her dad's relationship, it was the counter opposite of her and her mother's relationship. Lucy Potts encouraged all of her children to jump at the sun. And that saying is one of the things that Zora held on to throughout her life. In fact, there's a documentary on PBS, and you can rent it through Amazon Prime, and it's called Jump at the Sun. And Lucy Potts was educated, she was powerful, she was a great speaker. She even encouraged her husband, who was from the other side of the tracks and considered no good by Lucy's family, to rise to the heights that he did. Unfortunately, Zora grew up seeing infidelity and violence between her parents. Now, this was not something that was uncommon then or in her life, because she tells stories about even her aunt and uncle having issues. In Eatonville, one of the things that's special, and if you read Their Eyes Were Watching God, you know about Joe Clark. You know about the town store. That is not fictitious. That was actually a real place in the town of Eatonville. And Zora grew up hiding behind a store to hear stories. Now, the interesting thing about that is she was not supposed to be there, of course. But with that, she started to develop a sense of storytelling, which was very powerful for her. Now, the other interesting thing about that is Zora kept a lot of those stories. And she was considered Eatonville's most infamous citizen, because stories she knew about people, we think, oh, she has such a great imagination. Oh, this is such a great story. It's fiction. A lot of them were true and based on real people. So you could imagine how that went. Zora had something really tough happen in her life early on. At the age of 13, her mother died, and pretty suddenly. So the one person who was protecting her, who was encouraging her, passed away. And she was left with her siblings, some of them older and out of the house by this time, and her dad. And her father quickly remarried someone who was not much older than her. Her sister would go off to school, and Zora would go off too. But at a certain point, her father would encourage the school to adopt her, and he stopped paying her tuition. This left Zora in a toil. She couldn't get her education. She didn't have money. She started to move around from family member to family member's house. At one point, she lived with her older brother and helped him and his wife take care of their kids. And she was miserable because he promised he would help her get back into school. Zora was still a firecracker in school, though. One of the things that she did was that she put a piece of ice, a block of ice, under one of the teacher's sheets in the dormitory. So she was a prankster. She had a lot of fun, but she loved education from the time she was young, reading the entire Bible, reading any Greek mythology she could get her hands on, which is impressive to me. I don't know about you guys. Any visitors, sometimes they would have visitors, white visitors, at her school in Eatonville. And they would bring her things to read, and she would impress them by how much she knew. Zora's heart broke when she could not continue her education. And so she decided that she would leave her brother's house. And this, for a long time, caused a divide in their relationship, which they later on reconciled, which is awesome. And he apologized because he didn't understand what she was trying to do. So Zora left and she headed north. And so she worked for a traveling performance group, and she was a actress's maid. And there Zora found opera. She learned about being on stage, and she entertained everyone who was around her. Now, this was one of the best jobs that she could have ever had because it gave her a different experience. And now she's north. It is a contradiction to her slower southern life, but she's loving it. And things are going well. Except she still can't go to school. She hasn't even finished high school yet. The lady she was a maid for decides to get married. And this means that Zora no longer has a job. And her employer told her she would do everything she could to help her. And she did. She would send her money. She would do everything she could. But Zora wanted to finish school. So she found out that she could go to school for free, but she had to be under 18. And at this time, Zora is in her 20s. So instead of saying, oh, well, I give up, I can't do this, she decided to do what she would do for the rest of her life. And that was lie about her age. A lot of times it said that Zora did it for the vanity because she looked younger than she was. She could pass for 16 in her 20s. But it was not for that. It was divisive because she wanted to complete college or high school, sorry, and she did not have finances. She didn't have her job anymore. And it worked. And so she went to finish high school and she was able to meet even college students at that point. She was older than some of them, but no one knew. And she was at a prep academy, and then she went to Howard Prep Academy, and then she would go on to Howard. Now Zora was always like she was always taken care of because of her personality, I believe. And so she started at Howard University, and she thought that was the best thing ever. She considered it the pinnacle of black education. And so everything she did there, she was proud of, except for the fact that she was hard up for cash. Now, Zora, she worked as a manicurist for a barbershop in Washington, D.C., where Howard is located. And she got to meet a lot of influential people, governors, senators. A lot of the conversations that she had were, I couldn't even imagine being a manicurist for a governor or senator. So she knew a lot about what was going on politically. And I think this would inform the rest of her life, aside from her father being a lawmaker in what she calls her hometown and her birthplace. And so Zora, she always had this certain air about her that allowed her to be in certain spaces with powerful people. Now, unfortunately, at Howard, she would be there from 1918 to 1924, and she would only be able to get her associate's degree. And that's because she was always trying to find work to finance her education and her grades. As smart as Zora was, if she wasn't interested in it, and I can relate, she just didn't do well in it. So she would have A's in the classes she liked and F's in the ones she did not. Zora would go to Howard and she would meet lots of friends. And some of those friends would have cousins come down, and she was told, "Oh, you know what? I think you're onto something here. You're pretty smart." And of course, Zora's like, "Yes, I am smart." She would then move to New York, or visit New York actually, and she in 1925, and she would start to really develop her literary abilities because she had been encouraged in English before. At Howard, she was a part of the Stylists, which was a literary group on campus, and that was led by Alain Locke. And Alain Locke, if you don't know who he is, he was pretty influential during this period. Think W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey. He was up there. He was acquainted with Charles S. Johnson, who ran the Urban League. He was acquainted with James Weldon Johnson, who was the leader for the NAACP, and so he knew people. And so knowing him was very good for Zora because, of course, it opened some doors, which we'll talk about. But being a part of the Stylist wasn't the only literary group she was a part of. She also got to go to Halfway House, which was the literary popular place in Washington, D.C. And she got to rub elbows with poets and accomplished people there. And so, continuing on, Zora decided to publish her first short story, and it got the notice of Alain Locke. Zora would then go on to compete with the Opportunity magazine literary contest. And if you're wondering, oh, Opportunity magazine, it was the Urban League's counter to the Crisis by the NAACP. Now, Opportunity magazine was important because at the time, we think about the talented 10th, we think about the new Negro. Opportunity gave the new Negroes, the talented 10th, a chance to compete for cash prizes and to go to dinners and rub elbows with famous people. But not just famous black people, famous and influential white people too. And this was really important because they could meet publishers, they could meet other authors, best-selling authors. Fannie Hurst, who wrote Imitation of Life, was frequently at those dinners. A lady who would actually become Zora's benefactor, and Langston Hughes, who was in Opportunities contest that year, was also benefited by these dinners because he and Zora had the same benefactor. Now, Zora would compete and she would win second place for a short story and a play. Now, you would think that winning second place, a lot of times, I mean, if you didn't win first, you didn't really win, right? Not for Zora. Zora went into the after party for the Opportunity contest, where she attended the dinner and got to meet all the fancy, influential people and start to make a name for herself in New York, in Harlem. And she came in colorful clothes. In fact, I'm wearing red today to honor Zora because she didn't believe in bland, plain clothes. And she walked in with flowing scarves, and she threw one scarf around her neck and yelled out the title of one of her winning pieces, Color Struck, just as loud as could be in the middle of the party. And you've probably guessed it, Zora was not shy at all. She wasn't shy. And so she was usually the center of attention anywhere that she went. And one of the things that made her center of attention as she went to these parties, as she met these highly influential people, was her ability to storytell. And not only storytell, but she could impersonate other people. And so this brought a lot of attention to her because everybody wanted to hear Zora's stories from Eatonville and watch her do her impersonations. Now, Zora would go on to meet Ann Nathan Meyer through Fannie Hurst. She became Fannie Hurst's secretary, and she was terrible at it. She was terrible at shorthand. She was not detail oriented, but Fannie Hurst liked her personality and decided to keep her on as essentially a companion and a chauffeur. Fannie Hurst and Zora would go on many adventures, and Zora always drove. And Fannie Hurst even integrated a hotel at one time, telling the owners of the hotel that Zora was an African princess. And Zora remarked from this experience that because she was allowed to have dinner, that a meal had never been so bitter. I could not imagine that reaction. But through Fannie Hurst, Zora also met Ann Nathan Meyer. Now, Ann Nathan Meyer was one of the founders of Barnard College, which was the all women's section of Columbia. And Ann Nathan Meyer arranged for Zora to go essentially to Columbia, but Baynard. So Zora did go to Baynard. And for the first time, she did not have to worry about the finance. She didn't have to worry about the finance because Ann Nathan Meyer arranged for her to have a scholarship, which was really cool. Zora, at this time, I mean, she's a published author because she has her short stories published in journals. She's on the scene in New York, and she did not experience any overt prejudice. And that was cool because she was the only black student there at the time. Zora, her time at that college was really important because she would get her degree. And she thought that she wanted to be either a writer, a teacher, or a social worker. And she wrote writer first, but she said she would accept the other two as consolation prizes. I couldn't really see Zora as a social worker, but she did dabble in some teaching. Zora would go on to become an anthropologist. She would study under Franz Boas, which is he's considered the father of all anthropology. But Zora noticed something. In her studies of anthropology, beyond stereotypical representations, there was no place for her people. And so she decided that she would learn the scientific methods for collecting this data, and then she would document the stories, the details, all the science of her people in the truest form that she could. And so from there, that's what Zora tried to do. She traveled back down south. She worked on turpentine camps, and she collected folklore. She collected the information, the language of everyday black folks. And I think that's a little known fact about her. A lot of times we hear her as the writer, but Zora is actually and was actually a trained anthropologist. Now, much to the dismay of her professor and her mentor, Zora was not scientific enough. She would sometimes be sloppy, as they would say, with her work, and she would be essentially biased. And Zora was not ashamed of that because for her, she knew there was no way that this could, documenting her own people, the history, the traditions, the songs, the language, there was no way she could be unbiased. And that gave her a special edge. She was good at getting these stories after her first trip because she didn't go in with her education or talking a certain way. She went back to her Eatonville roots and she was able to connect with the people. And they would tell her these stories, and no one could believe how much Zora collected. Now, she was actually financed by benefactor Charlotte Osgood Mason, which is her first real, I think, block to doing her work the way that she wanted to do it. Godmother, as she required herself to be called, funded the work of black artists at the time, including Langston Hughes. Alain Locke was actually her right-hand man. And he essentially brought people to her and said, like, oh, I think you should support this one or that one because this. Now, the problem with that is the contract that Zora agreed to enter into actually said that Mrs. Mason had to approve everything that she did. And she could not work on other things that she wanted to do, but only work on what Godmother, Mrs. Mason, wanted her to do. And Charlotte Osgood Mason had tried her hand at anthropology. She had collected on what she called the primitives and being Native Americans. And she wanted to get into collecting on black primitives. And that's where Zora came in. Now, Zora was forever rebellious, But in the letters between her and Godmother, you see an appreciation because Zora had, I mean, she was taking care of her needs, but the struggle she had, I remember reading that she, in her own letters, that she had to wash her face with laundry soap at one point because she was so poor. So to have this agreement, to have this contract where she knew she had money coming in, she essentially pledged allegiance to whatever Godmother wanted her to do, even though she knew that she was missing out on doing some of the things she wanted to do. Now, as far as the contract, neither Zora nor Godmother seemed to really read the contract because Zora could have done and had some flexibility to do some things she wanted to do. But I think she was so grateful to have this opportunity that she did it. Now, this is 1928, 1929, and Zora is a black woman. She's driving her own car. She has a gun. She's wearing pants, which was not acceptable back then, but she's making her own way. One of the things I found most impressive about Zora is that she traveled. She traveled to collect folklore to Honduras. She traveled to Jamaica. She traveled to Haiti. She had plans to travel to Central America to collect folklore. But to see her actually do those things, for me, it was amazing. And throughout her life, she did everything that she really wanted to do with a full heart. There was no half doing it. One of the greatest things that Zora did, as far as I'm concerned, aside from the traveling, Zora decided that she was going to study hoodoo. And study hoodoo because of the fact that it's a part of black culture throughout the diaspora. She decided that she would study it to the point that she became a voodoo priestess. Now, she didn't talk about that a ton. She grew up with a father who was a preacher, so she did not fully denounce her Christian roots, but she did call into question some of the religious and non-original practices of our ancestors. And so Zora really studied, and to the point that she would do things like, if she was being trained and one time she had to lay on a couch for days, and she started to hallucinate. And so this was her acclamation and acceptance into voodoo priesthood. And I think that that was one of the amazing things because she didn't look at things with judgment. She said, hey, I'm a student of this. I actually want to learn, and I am going to give it my all into learning. Now, when it comes to her writing, Zora, of course, their eyes are watching God. I think pretty much if anybody knows Zora, they've read that book. But Zora's first novel was Jonah's Gourdvine, in which she features a character that is pretty much her dad. She rewrote her dad. And I think what's cool about that is that they had the strained relationship, but she decided that she would feature him as a character. She would use what she collected in the field to write stories and publish the folklore. When Zora wrote her first novel, actually she hadn't even written it. Lippincott actually reached out to her and said, hey, have you written anything lately? Are you working on a book? And she's, yeah, I am. And she was not. In fact, that acceptance of her book idea came the day she had gotten evicted. Zora wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, Jonah's Gourdvine, Muse and Men, Tell My Horse. She even collected the stories of the last black slave, known at that time, in the book Barracoon, which was published after she died. We owe so much to Zora. I want to make sure I give you guys time for questions. But one thing I want you to know is that Zora, things are always being uncovered about her. Her influence extends through history, literature, when you think about the social sciences, folklore, anthropology, even religion. She wanted to write her final book on King Herod, And she did a lot of studying on that. If you know who Stanley Kubrick is, I just learned that he felt that way about Napoleon and wanted to produce a movie about Napoleon. Zora was in that realm with King Herod. She worked for Paramount Pictures at one time. She traveled around the world. There's so much. You don't have to be a writer to love Zora. She is just absolutely amazing. And I hope, even in this 45 minutes, because I could talk about it forever, that there's something that has piqued your curiosity. Matt, do we have any questions or comments?
Hello. Yeah, so actually, I have one for you.
Yay.
You're such an accomplished writer, and your books are so terrific. And this is not a hyperbolic statement. My daughter loves them. Can you tell us a little bit about your process and talk specifically about how Zora Neale Hurston influenced your writing specifically?
Yeah, so so I actually started writing before I fully knew about Zora. I think what Zora did for me with my process, it started very differently than it is now. So I've been a published children's author since 2014, and I published my first book for women last year. So initially, Matt, I thought, I had to go into writing with a specific goal. I was not born in Eatonville where I could just be my full self without what Zora called the white gaze. And so I was raised to know what was proper and what was respectable. And so my process started like that. What's the lesson that I want to teach that's acceptable? And then when I found Zora, I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't just write what's respectable and acceptable. Maybe I should really honor these different parts of myself. Like I said, Zora was an anthropologist, a folklorist. She was even a playwright. She wrote a few poems. She traveled the world meeting people and doing things. And she inspired me to really live to my fullest. When I wrote my book for women, I was really scared because I thought there was no way I could transition out of that. But now there are so many things that I want to write. And now from Zora, I've learned to say I'm a storyteller, not, oh, I'm a children's author, or, oh, I'm this. I am a storyteller. And that transcends genres.
Can you remind us, just for the folks that might not be as familiar with your work, when did Oh Bleep I'm 30, when did that one come out?
It came out last year. So we did pre-orders last year, and then with COVID, it kind of slowed down production a little bit, but it can be purchased from my site, ashleechesny.com, and I'll autograph a copy for you. And that book, I mean, Zora would love it. I mean, I know that she would love it because she was outspoken, she was inappropriate, and she was an individual, which was rare at that time for women.
So we have another question from another amazing female writer in our area, Janet Martineau, somebody that I admire deeply, longtime arts writer and advocate. So big shout out to Janet. Janet wonders what role Zora Neale Hurston would play in today's world, specific to the racial inequity that's pervasive right now.
Janet, that's an awesome question. And I was literally just thinking, oh, I should have touched on this. So Zora was very controversial because she was called the first Black Republican. Zora, growing up in this independent town, did not believe in the race problems of segregation in a way that her counterparts did. One of the things that I learned just in the past month, because it was very upsetting to me, I didn't know if I had to renounce my love for Zora, because when it came to Brown versus Board, Zora wrote a letter to the Orlando Centennial, and I was like, Zora, what are you doing? She was essentially saying that she opposed desegregation in schools. And so this, honestly, if I had not come across Zora's objection to it, I would not have taken the time to read the full details of it. And Zora was she was the center of a lot of conflict because the agenda of great organizations such as the NAACP, the Urban League, Zora always seemed to oppose them. And her opposition was not necessarily wrong. She was an individual, but a lot of individuals felt as though she was essentially doing a disservice to her people and undoing the progress that was trying to be had. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is that I was so upset. I've read 600 letters written by Zora Neale Hurston. So imagine this is the equivalent of someone reading our text messages today, which I don't know about you, Matt, but I'm like, don't read all of them. And so I get to see in her own words what she wrote and what she thought. Now, one of the things that's upsetting to me is that Zora actually had a point. Her letter to the Orlando Centennial that was published, she was attacked for it left and right, and rightfully so. But in a letter later to Mary Holland, who was the wife of Senator and Governor Holland of Florida, she said, I am a Negro, so I cannot oppose desegregation. I oppose the way in which it's being done. And I'm like, Zora, why didn't you say that in the letter that was published in a paper? Because she was right. So I feel like one of the challenges Zora had is that she was so smart and she thought so fast that she sometimes didn't articulate the small points. So I think that Zora would probably be a very controversial person right now still when it comes to race relations, because she did not look through the lens which other black counterparts, including myself, I grew up in Detroit, which is still pretty segregated. She didn't have that white gaze or being respectable for white eyes that a lot of black people, including myself, are raised with. And so I think that she would. I mean, she supported Robert Taft in the presidential election against Eisenhower, and Robert Taft said that if he was president, he would not undo segregation because his job was to uphold constitutional law. Now, I don't think it would be a problem because Zora had her thoughts. I think it would be a problem because of the way that she articulated them. So yes, Janet, hopefully that answers your question. I think she would be super controversial. I think she would cause a lot of upset right now. Yeah. Matt, any more questions?
Yeah, we got a few more. A lot of, folks were not really aware of her work. So, thanking you for sharing your story and genuine interest in doing further reading. So, I guess to that point, most of us are familiar with her through Their Eyes Are Watching God, and that's usually kind of our first glimpse into her work. Is that a logical first step? And if not, what do you recommend maybe as the first thing to read and check out, and best way to experience your work on a deeper level?
So I think the quickest way, I'm all about efficiency. So for me, I am a presenter who is not, and I'm a lover of Zora herself and who she was as a person. I think she provides a unique opportunity to see a human in history. I consider history like that first wave of branding, because usually when we hear about somebody in history, we know things about them, but Zora, you get to essentially know her. I would say if you're interested in her work, a book just came out this year in January called How to Hit a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick, and they're short stories, which I think is awesome because she was always considered the genius of the South, a writer of the South. But you see, she hits on some themes of migration north. She talks about Harlem. She talks about reverse migration. And so, aside from her other novels that were published, where the characters are always in the South, you get to see that, hey, that's not the only thing she was interested in. That's just what was published. Their Eyes for Watching God is a classic. I mean, I love it. But hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick, I would start there. If you're interested in her life and you like to read, no, I'll take that back. Before that, if you are interested in understanding more of the dynamic of slavery through a personal lens, I recommend Barracoon, which was published last year. And it's a quick read. Some of the language is kind of tough to get through because she tries to keep language as authentic as she can. So you have the last black slave, there's broken English. But I love it because it educated me a lot on the diversity of slavery. And then it shows her work and her care in which she captures stories. If you want to know about her life and you're super ambitious, I absolutely recommend Wrapped in Rainbows by Valerie Boyd. That was the first book that I read that I was like, wow. It's a long book, but it gives a lot of context. If you want a shorter read to learn about Zora's life, I recommend this Zora Neale Hurston by Robert Hemingway. Just keep in mind that this was written in the 70s when things about Zora were not really, the facts weren't validated. So Zora lied about her age. And so even on her tombstone, it says that, or her gravestone, it says that she was born in 1901 and she was born in 1891. So when you're reading things about Zora, it can be dizzying. But I think this is great because it provides historical context. It provides context to some of her frustrations and some of her life challenges.
Thank you. And actually, somebody asked that in the chat shortly after. There's a little bit of a lag, so we seem to be on the same page as the folks in the chat. So, Cricket, thank you for that question. April asks, so this is specific to you, Ashlee. How do you see Zora in your existence, and what connects you to her so deeply?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like honestly, I hope we're all friends by now. You guys have been listening to me talk for like an hour now. Zora gives me like heavy auntie vibes. Zora didn't have kids. She was married 3 times. She was like, the love affair should be over when it's not pleasurable anymore. She was that fun aunt, which I actually consider her pretty close to my aunt that I have now. She's that one that would talk to you. There's letters in Zora Neale Hurston, A Life in Letters, where she talks to her nephew about being talented, about not believing in himself quite yet, but he should. And so for me, I feel like she's that aunt who gives you the advice or tells you, hey, that batshit thing you want to do that's crazy, like go ahead and do it. She is the one person in history that I probably really feel connected to. Even sometimes when I'm about to write, I'm like, oh, Zora, what would you think about this? And by this point, I've read over 2,500 pages by her, about her, her letters. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on her personality. And I feel like she kind of talks back. We connect in so many ways, or I feel connected to her in so many ways. One of the ways later in life, she was kind of a recluse. Didn't want to be in a public eye anymore. And so one of the things she loved to do was gardening. And so this year, myself and my 3-year-old son, we actually started a garden. And I'm like, I get why you love this. I get why you would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, even though I don't do that. And, and really love these plants. And so for me, she's opened up a world on so many levels that I didn't even know you could be if you were this great writer. So April, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and Cricket sends his thanks because as a bonus, he was looking for preferred biographies. So we killed a couple of birds with one stone there. So thank you for providing that.
Awesome.
Again, we're here with the incredible Ashlee Chesny, one of my favorite humans on the planet. Just an amazing author, artist, a complete package, wonderful mom. I happen to know their family, just amazing human being. And so, Ashlee, that appears to be kind of the end of our question. So I want to turn it back to you and give you the last word. You know, what are your kind of closing thoughts how can we use Ms. Hurston's legacy in what's going on today, and what are some kind of closing takeaways? What do you hope we can do kind of moving forward, and how do you hope that we can continue to learn more and continue to use her works to inspire us today?
I mean, I hope at this point everyone that has something that has piqued their interest about Zora Neale Hurston, a woman who lived from 1891 to 1960, through the Great Depression, published so many things. Right now, we're in this pandemic, and things look really different than I know I expected, and I bet a lot of you expected things to look this year. I plan to do this presentation a lot of places and travel around and work with children. I think when it comes to Zora, one of the things you can do is look at the legacy of her life, not just her work. A lot of times we judge people by the sum of their works or their accomplishments. And if you have become interested in her, I believe that everyone can find something inspiring. For example, my husband he's into history and politics. And so he thinks Zora is cool because of her involvement with politics and who she knew historically. I think that when we look at her, we can learn to adapt. She lived in a small town in Florida, and she lived in New York and was a part of the Harlem Renaissance, the queen of it. And then she became a recluse again and found joys in the simple things. And I feel like that's a great lesson in life. It's never one speed. So enjoy it. I hope you guys are interested in Zora. If you guys have any questions, I know sometimes the hour goes by, kids are going to bed. You can email me actually at zorafile@gmail.com, and that's ZORPHILE@gmail.com. I'm always up for discussions. If I don't know, I will find the answer. And I am so thankful, Matt. Thank you for being on. Josh is in the background helping us with technology, and Jenny coordinated this whole thing. So I am so honored to be here with you guys tonight and to have you guys on my team for a Zora Neale Hurston presentation.
Thank you, Ashlee. And just remind us one more time, how do we find you on social? How do we find out more information about you as an author, your books, and how do we continue to support your amazing work and scholarship?
All right, Matt, are you ready? Because I'm going to run it down.
Let's do it.
All right, so for my work with women, you can go to ashleechesny.com. That's ASHLEECHESNY.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, Ashlee Chesny. And that's my work with women and adults. If you're interested in what I do with kids, I am reimagining education for children of color, which is super exciting. I am Mrs. Ashlee Chesny, and you can find me at mrsashley.com. I actually have a YouTube channel where I post videos every Tuesday and Thursday for early learners, and that is Mrs. Ashlee's Learning Emporium. You can follow me, Mrs. Ashlee, on Facebook and Mrs. Ashlee Chesny on Instagram. If you want this cool shirt that I'm wearing today, I actually sell Zora Neale Hurston paraphernalia, and that is Zorafile on Etsy. I think I got it all, Matt.
Awesome. Well, Mrs. Ashlee Chesny, thank you so much for your time and talent and expertise. We appreciate you being with us tonight, as always, and look forward to being able to see you, hopefully, in person sometime soon.
Soon, right? Soon. Everybody be safe and well.
Good night, everybody.